His explosiveness, his rack, does a great job of setting up defenders, dynamic with the ball in his hand. He makes you think, where is Tank Dell at on the field? Is he in the slot? Is he lined up in the backfield? Is he outside? He has the ability to run away from defenders. He has the ability to beat press cover. He has also the field awareness that you really want out of your wide receiver. He's a tank. You can put his size in there, remove that. Let that stop being the excuse. Just look at the man's body of work. I don't care what school he went to. I don't care what size he is or he isn't. What he does do is play the kind of football that you want on your team. Agent 89 believes that Tank Dell, you got the seal of approval, young man.
That is high praise of Tank Dell, the Texans' third-round pick, by Steve Smith, legendary Panthers wide receiver. One of the greatest receivers of all time. Rather sneaky in terms of the statistics he has. At the time of his retirement, 7th in all-purpose yards, 7th in career receiving yards, 12th in career receptions, 25th in receiving touchdowns. And look, it's best case scenario for Tank Dell to be the second coming of Steve Smith. Super best case scenario. But if Steve Smith is that complimentary of a guy who he shares a lot of similarities with, undersized, third-round picks, both versatile players, can catch passes, can return kicks. And on top of that, the fact that they went to smaller schools, Smith went to Utah to finish his college career. Tank Dell, of course, the University of Houston, playing in the AAC. I like hearing Steve Smith say those things. We'll see if it actually pans out. I'm curious about your thoughts, Mike, along with just about everybody else's, on the trade that the Houston Texans made after taking C.J. Stroud up to number 3 to go and get Will Anderson. First-round pick swaps in this past draft, another first-round pick that they gave up, a second-round pick that they gave up, a third-round pick that they gave up. Was the price too much? Do you feel like the Texans did perhaps a little bit too much reaching here?
I mean, listen, if we're going to go strictly draft capital, yes, probably. But I think at least if you're a Texans fan, the thing to be heartened by is the fact that they're at least trying to establish the foundation in all the right areas, right? Like you cleaned out some of the, Easter bee-sized holes in the front office and got a lot of that out of the way. You went in and brought in D'Amico Ryans, who by all accounts sounds like one of the next great hot leader prospects at the coaching position in the NFL. And then you said, okay, well, last year we got, production from young guys at the spots like running back, Derek Stingley Jr., and now we're going to add quarterback. We have locked down the pass protector on the left-hand side for him and Laramie Tunsil, and we're going to go get a pass rusher. They're all the foundations of football that you need, the way that we look at the pillars that you build around. And so it's one of those things, yes, price tags-wise, you box yourself in a little bit because this is still a team that's got holes elsewhere and other needs that they've got to plug in. But at the same time, all of that gets alleviated somewhat if you believe you've got the right guys at these spots. And based on, what I watched and the way that I studied these guys leading up to the draft, I could say they're at least guys that seem to be blue-chip, dependable kind of stock. It's just going to be now, can D'Amico Ryans and company here continue to build around them and develop them in the way they need to?
That's where I'm at, Mike. I think they gave up draft capital-wise too much. But the other side of things is much like, the previous conversation I was having with the Rockets. The Texans needed to find a way to be relevant again. And I think it's really difficult to sell a fan base that this team is going in the right direction without making big splash moves, which obviously doesn't always work out so well. We've seen with other teams winning the offseason, winning March specifically, the Dolphins of years past, the Commanders back in the day, among other teams. And yeah, it's probably going to be an irresponsible move when we look back at this a couple of years later. But I'm where you're at. I'm cool with it. Hopefully these guys just end up being good players. And if they are, we won't be talking about it.
No, exactly. And listen, it's an interesting time to try and gauge that amongst the rest of the division too, right? Like this is a division that's certainly in flux for almost every piece involved. Even the Titans, who have been sort of at the top of things for a while now, that seems to be a team that is on the verge of the kind of foundational shakeup that we've seen pretty much everyone else go through. We know Jacksonville on the up and up, but you've got an opportunity right now to come in and try and get some early success for your head coach, too. I think we also kind of underrate that, as we've seen. and think, all right, these new coaches coming in, hot prospects, contracts that are supposed to give them and buy them some time. It's really how it works in this league. You want to see the ball go through the basket some early as you're trying to build, that word everyone talks about, like culture, this amorphous thing that we just sort of throw in a situation we don't know what else to talk about. But part of that is being able to say, hey, the things that we do translate to success early on, and that's a lot easier for a coach to do with young players who he thinks he can put in a position to win and try and get those wins early.
Mike Golic Jr. played played on the offensive line in Notre Dame. On top of that, DraftKings analyst, host of the Gojo podcast with us on the HRP guest line. When this draft was upon us, I think a lot of people had differing opinions on the top 4 quarterbacks. Obviously, the Panthers took Bryce Young at first overall. Texans took C.J. Stroud. Colts take Anthony Richardson. Will Levis falls to the second round in Tennessee. Going into the draft, how would you rank all 4 of those quarterbacks?
That was the order that I had him in. You could have made arguments for CJ based on the physical profile to go number 1 overall. We've already seen everyone going back to the well on the Bryce Young hype stuff when we got the rookie minicamp videos of him out there in front of his offensive line, as if he didn't look small in front of the offensive line in Alabama too. But that's what we're going to keep doing. So that's the order I would have had him in. What Bryce did in college, deserving of that. We'll wait and see if he can physically stand up to the task here. But I would have had CJ as the second guy. I thought that accuracy-wise, all the things that we brought up there, mobile enough, like we know the big game stuff where that showed up, the game against Georgia. We saw the hype of it there, but I thought pretty consistently he was a quarterback going back to the season prior, too, when everyone got a little bit worked up because of the Oregon game early in that season in 2021. This has been a guy who consistently grew as a player during his time at Ohio State, obviously had protection, had weapons, and certainly was better off in those areas. And he might be early on in his time at Houston, but I still think that's a guy that gives you a decided advantage where he puts the ball. He does it at a high level, does it at an NFL level. So he was the second guy that I had.
Is the, among some, anti-Ohio State quarterback bias that some people have when guys come out, Justin Fields maybe is changing that in Chicago, but given their talent compared to the talent that they generally play against in the Big Ten, the amazing wide receiver core that they've had over the last couple of years, and a system that seems to make it as easy as possible for any quarterbacks. I know that I have been guilty in the past of looking at Ohio State quarterbacks with a bit of a side eye. Is that fair?
I think generally not. I understand that because they come from a similar system. We've seen them one after another, right? Between, Justin Fields, Dwayne Haskins before him, on and on down the list. You've got all these guys that it's not like you have large swaths of time in between. They're running some of the same stuff, although I would argue that Ryan Day and that offense have morphed somewhat around the different skill sets of each of these guys to try and maximize that. And, yeah, you do have the talent portion there, but I still think everyone deserves to be evaluated on their own merit. All of the players that we just mentioned, different players, different strengths, different things that make them tick. And so I don't think it's as easy as saying, well, every Ohio State quarterback is going to come out and produce X, because that also does a disservice to the most important factor in any quarterback's development is the organization they land in, right? With Justin Fields, we're just getting to sniff this now because he went there for year one, and Matt Nagy and that offensive staff seemed to go out of their way to put together game plans that were the exact opposite of maximizing the strengths of their young quarterback. And on down the list, the organization needs to bear the brunt of some of the results and outcomes that we see with these players. And so to me, yeah, listen, there's a reason they all have success at Ohio State too, because that's a competent organization. It's one of the best organizations in college football, and so the output's going to be like that. You get these guys then spit out into organizations that sometimes fall woefully short of the standard. And so I think a lot of that has to go to the team as well, not just, these Ohio State quarterbacks, they're the common problem.
Mike Golic Jr. with us, DraftKings analyst, host of the Gojo podcast. Mike, you played on the offensive line at Notre Dame. You went to a couple of offseason camps as well with the Steelers, the Saints. You look at this offensive line On paper, I feel pretty good about it. I'm not going to act like I know anything about offensive line play. I'll be honest. Like, it's generally the last thing I'm looking at, so I leave it to experts like you. You have Laramie Tunsil at left tackle with that big contract they gave him this offseason. You have Kenyon Green, who last year at least showed some signs early, but maybe was a bit of a disappointment as a first-round pick in year one. They draft Juice Scruggs, the center out of Penn State at center. Right guard, they trade for Shaq Mason. Right tackle, Titus Howard on the fifth-year option of his contract. Pretty good at right tackle. How do you view this offensive line? Where would you put it, I guess, in terms of tiers in the NFL?
Yeah, I'm not sure I can give you a tier answer. I mean, listen, looking inside the division, let's just always start with that, right?
Right.
Another spot where you're at least building towards something, right? You've got a foundation and a flag planted with Laramie there. You could argue in the conversation for the best left tackle in the NFL when you talk about Trent Williams, him, some of the other usual suspects in the conversation. And I think that gives you such a leg up as much as anything. I think for Kenyon and some of those guys, we've seen for top prospects in the past, sometimes it takes these guys a year or two, for him coming out of Texas into a new sort of setting here. I'm willing to give him a little bit of time to develop. Think of the way we saw with like Andrew Thomas with the New York Giants, a guy who I liked ability-wise, liked pedigree-wise coming out of college, but just takes a little bit, especially on a team that's struggling right now. And you got to think for those guys. You're playing a two-quarterback system a lot of last year. A lot of the things that the Houston Texans had to do, some of which were to mitigate the offensive line, but also didn't make life easier for them. So I think it's a group that's ascending, and again, especially relative to the rest of this division, you've at least got a little bit more certainty and an idea of where you're trying to go.
I've been trying to black out some of the things that they did offensively. Where they're putting Jeff Driscoll out there with Davis Mills. Good God. How would you handle this if you are DeMeco Ryans? We're seeing Carolina. They're going with hey, Andy Dalton's our starting quarterback. We'll see how long that lasts. The Texans, meanwhile, at rookie minicamp, I think this was straight out of the Patriots playbook where Nick Caserio was before. They didn't even make C.J. Stroud available. Do you think that Stroud has to, by default, be the starter going into next season? I know a lot of people from a fan perspective are going to be ticked off if it's Davis Mills to open up the year. But there also is an element of, hey, you do want the rookie quarterback to earn his spot. Sometimes seems like a cliche going into training camp, going into the offseason. If you were DeMeco Ryans, would you be putting C.J. Stroud with the ones right away?
Listen, I think unless there is a staggering difference, right? Like if it came out and he really was woefully underperforming relative to the other quarterbacks in the roster, then listen, you don't want to insult the rest of the team, right? They all understand what the deal is. Everyone in the NFL is smart enough to see, hey, we took this guy with the second pick. He's going to be our guy eventually. But at the same time, if you're DeMeco Ryans and you're trying to come in and establish credibility right away, and whatever you talk about with your culture, whether it's competition, whatever, the usual things and the idioms that we hear from these coaches, you've got to early on give people some tangible results of that. And so if CJ were to be completely heads and tails below the other guys, you put him out there, it'd be a mistake. But tie goes to the rookie in my mind here. From what we saw last year from Davis Mills and company, no one deserves to walk right in and take it. And so if you go out there, he's showing close enough, I'd be trying to get him as many of those reps as possible, because while it's not quite the Anthony Richardson situation where you only got 12, 14 starts under your belt coming out of college, I do think one of the best ways to learn is to do. And I think that's especially true for quarterbacks in this league, where every rep that you can get seeing NFL defenses is going to be massive in terms of development. And this is what you've done. You've based your roster and set your roster around young pillars. We saw a bunch of them get out there last year and get meaningful experience. And so if it's at all close, I say tie goes to the rookie.
Mike Golic Jr. with us right now, the DraftKings analyst, host of the Go Joe podcast. DeMeco Ryans is an ex-player turned head coach. It's pretty crazy that he played for this team like just over a decade ago, and now he is back as the head coach of this team. We've seen some former players turned head coach do very well. Mike Vrabel. We've seen others not do so hot recently. I would point to Mike Singletary. Both these guys, linebackers. Singletary, damn good linebacker, and Vrabel, a big part of those Patriot teams. As far as DeMeco Ryans, as a coach who used to play, what's going to be the biggest challenge for him going from not that long ago being a player, and obviously he's had some coaching experience since then, to being now the head coach of an entire operation?
I always think the biggest difference for these guys is just figuring out how to delegate and when to delegate, right? Because for D'Amico, he's come up through the ranks and he's gotten to do his thing on the defensive side of the ball, and he's gotten to hone in. And by all accounts, the intangible stuff, right? Leadership traits, the ability to communicate concepts to players, going all the way back to when he was a player. You know, I heard a guy like Bo Allen, who played with him in Philadelphia, talk about just the full picture view that he had of everyone's job and how he was able to help Bo as a young player get his job done because D'Amico knew what everyone had to do, and so he could put them in position to succeed. And he just translated. Guys who see the game like that as players really tend to translate as coaches well because you're not just a gifted player out there who can go and do your job. And so we saw that on the defensive side of the ball in San Francisco where it wasn't just, they had great players there, obviously, but we saw all along the way things schematically he did to help put those guys in position to succeed. Now it's got to be him doing that with the coaching staff, him doing that with the support staff, and making sure he can put together a plan, but also then that he gets comfortable delegating in the areas that he needs to, because now you don't have all of the time in the world. You can't devote all your resources to just one area. You got to figure out the give and take of that. To me, that's always the biggest challenge, even for the guys that seem to have the gift and all the things that we look for in a head coach. There's still that uncertainty because you get that much more dumped onto your plate.
We're going to see where he ranks among all the new coaching hires. Where would you rank the hiring of D'Amico Ryans among all the hirings this offseason? Frank Reich in Carolina, Jonathan Gannon in Arizona, Shane Steichen in Indianapolis, Sean Payton in Denver. How are you feeling, I guess, about this hire compared to the other ones?
Well, I mean, listen, I think if you look at the candidates everyone was looking for, D'Amico Ryans was the belle of the ball, right? I mean, I think everyone, including, now Sean Payton-led Denver Broncos, we're all trying to kick the tires on this. And so I'd say he was probably the most important because I did not look at Houston as an appealing landing spot for someone like him based on what we had seen in recent years from the way that front office had gone about business. Obviously, you had all of the death rattle, the end of the situation with Deshaun Watson there. And so the fact that they were able to coax someone back who does have the ties to the team, does give that fans the thing to root for, I think outside of, you could argue Sean Payton to Denver was the most important hire just because of where they were painted in with the Russell Wilson contract and how famously bad that went in year one, that they needed someone like Sean Payton to be able to come in who's done this before, who can instantly command that respect. But outside of sheer talent, upside, and the way that people around the league talk about him, it's hard to be more excited about a hire than Texans fans should be about D'Amico Ryans.
Mike Golic Jr., one last question for you, Mike, and this is the most important question I'm going to ask. As a whole, how do you feel about the Fast and Furious movie franchise?
I will continue to see them as long as they make them. And I know we're in the final one or two here, but I appreciate a franchise that innovates and allows for creativity. Because at this point, I saw a thread on Twitter the other day of when it finally went off the rails. And I think it was when Dom Toretto launched off one car to save someone from flying across the highway off another car. We've had, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson redirect missiles from submarines on top of ice as they're driving there. We've had him drive out of the front of planes. You can't pitch an idea to that writer's room that'll get shot down at this point. And I like a place with limitless possibility, and I look for the crossovers with Transformers, Jurassic Park, whatever they'll cook up, I'll see.
Oh, man, I'm so glad you brought up a Transformers crossover because that is the obvious next move. You just seamlessly transition into a reboot. Maybe you bring Mark Wahlberg and on top of that, Shia LaBeouf, you bring him back into the equation too. Oh yes, I will watch every single one of these. In fact, Mike, my producer and I, we are going to see the movie right after this show is done. We are that excited.
Oh, dude, that's the perfect start to the weekend, man. It's a Russian nesting doll of celebrity action heroes in these movies. What more could you want as we're getting into the summer to get a blockbuster going? It's best.
Hell yeah. Let's go. All right, Mike, you got me pumped up again after James Harden's return to Houston. Made me very depressed. He is Mike Golic Jr. You can catch him on the Gojo podcast and on DraftKings. Mike, let's do it again. Maybe we'll do a whole show of just talking about Fast and Furious in the future.
There we go. Fast and Furious review coming at you guys next week. We'll do a watch-along and go back through every movie for the people.
Hell yeah. That is Mike Golic Jr. Everybody, Mike, thank you.
Have a good one, man.